Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and today, as we head into the final weeks of a wild 2018 for the imaging industry, I want to follow up on my earlier experiences with the Nikon Z and Canon R back in late August and early September, as I promised I would. But before I do, a reminder that you only have until the end of this month, December, to enter our lighting giveaway, courtesy of our friends at B&H, who also made a Nikon Z7 kit available to us early on and have been more than patient with me as always. So thank you guys. You'll find out how to enter in the show notes down below. Also, a reminder that official Three Blind Men and an Elephant t-shirts are now available on our store at 3bmep.threadless.com. And finally, if you really end up liking what you see here today, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, join the conversation below, because the caliber of the conversation is really just first rate. Click on the little alarm bell to keep up to date, and consider supporting our work by using our no-cost-to-you affiliate links, or even contributing directly via PayPal or joining us on Patreon. All links in the show notes down below, along with the gear we use and other videos to which I refer today. We thank you for it. Finally, I also want to thank Canon for providing us with an R+ lenses, Nikon and Sigma for providing us with lenses, and again, being patient with me. On the one hand, even now, I feel I haven't had enough time with the gear, yet I've reached that point that we're heading off to London tomorrow. It's year-end, equipment must go back into the press pool. In other words, it's time to call it a day. But the way I want to do that is to take a step back, at least for a little bit, from offering yet another absolute proclamation on the worthiness or relative performance of Canon's and Nikon's new full-frame mirrorless cameras, based on an exhaustive suite of well-defined tests that other folks are actually better positioned to do than I, and from what so many of us have come to think of as important. That's because, A, these are first-generation products. In other words, the opening round of a much longer game, where, as has always been the case across industries and technologies, the legacy products outperform the new ones at first. See, for example, the writings of Clayton Christensen and Richard Foster if you're not already familiar with them. B, these two cameras especially remind me that what we need as image makers are not necessarily what manufacturers need as for-profit businesses reeling from the collapse of the traditional camera market. And C, I want to talk about the importance of wow. But forget about wow for now. That's pretty good. As some of you are already thinking, the heck with all of that, just tell us what you think about the Z and the R. And okay, I can reduce that to a single sentence. 2, 3, 4, no more than 4. 5, final answer. And then I'll go into some additional details. But I'd strongly suggest you do go back to the videos we did in August and September on the Z7 and R. As I said, I'll put links down to that in the show notes and up above here if I remember, as well as the videos we've done on all of the other crop sensor full frame and medium format cameras over the past year and a half or two, because that, I think, is the minimum relevant time frame for a full context of what follows. Along with, if you haven't already done so, taking a gander at the Z and R videos, especially by my buds Gordon Lang, Ted Forbes, Max Yuriev, Tony and Chelsea Northrup, Chris and Jordan Nichols-Drake. Sorry guys, I couldn't resist. Toby Gelston, Kevin Raber, and though I don't know them personally, Michael the Maven and Gerald Undone. Gordon does an absolutely fabulous job going into detail on just about every operational aspect of the Z. Max does a great job on video quality and autofocus performance comparisons as usual. Ted, Tony and Chelsea, Chris and Jordan have just about the best combination of information, analysis, and entertainment out there. Jordan, by the way, I loved your review of the Z's video capability in particular. Kevin and Toby bring unique voices. I mean, you guys get the idea. Michael did a pair of great videos on the R's ergonomics and banding issues. Gerald recently went through the various types of video recording techniques employed in these different cameras, things like pixel binning or line skipping, so that you'll understand what those specifications mean, how they differ, and what the implications for those differences are. I'm sure I've forgotten other worthy people, and I'm sure there are a lot of worthy people I don't know. So apologies in advance. Anyway, forthwith, my 5 sentences. Maybe some of our most recent imagery first. Was it obvious to you that we shot some of these, plot twist, with our 2018 lens of the year, the crop sensor coverage Leica DG50-200 2.8-4, on our sleeper camera of the year, the Micro Four Thirds Panasonic G9? Or that we shot with the new Sigma 60-600 4.5 6.3 mounted to an R with Canon's Goldilocks adapter? Or that we shot with the Nikon Z7 and their 105 1.4 and their It Just Works FTZ adapter? Was it obvious which was which? And if so, why? Was it obvious that the shoot was inspired by legendary photographer Jay Maisel, and most especially his book Jay Maisel's New York, published back in 2000? Because knowledge, inspiration, the sum total of who we've become up to the point we release the shutter or hit the record button is more important than gear 95% of the time for 95% of us, or something like that. For those of you attracted to the good old days of film, do you know that Jay Maisel is blown away by what he can get from his digital camera after decades using film, to the point that he's amazed he has to worry about things he doesn't see in his viewfinder, like dust particles? Another plot twist for all of you. Do you know that I just neglected to mention that Jay Maisel said this around 2008, 2009 of his 12.3 megapixel Nikon D3 with consumer grade 70-300 millimeter Nikkor zoom? Anyhow, now the 5 sentences. Long sentences. Run-on sentences, I admit it. 1. The Canon R and Nikon Zs are first-generation full-frame mirrorless system cameras that, judged on their own, show a tremendous amount of effort, forethought, and manufacturing prowess, offering superior build and feel compared to Sony's A7 lineup, yet are in some ways at a functional disadvantage compared to their own DSLR forebears, Sony's current third-generation full-frame cameras and native mount lens system, Fujifilm's third-generation APS-C camera system anchored by the X-T3, and Panasonic's fifth-generation Micro Four Thirds GH5, GH5S, and G9 camera system from Panasonic. I simply don't know Olympus. especially when it comes to lens selection, video capabilities, and burst rates, and just generally being buttoned up. Hold that thought. Two, if you are thinking of moving from your existing DSLR or mirrorless system, full frame or crop sensor to the Z's or R, it is simply, unequivocally a mistake not to overcome any negative assumptions or biases you may have about these alternatives long enough to look at them very, very closely, with an exceptionally clear sense of what you actually need and want, and whether or not the full costs of switching, along with the differences between actual and assumed similarities or differences in manual of arms, change the relative importance you attribute to each. 3. Contrary to many other folks, I think that Canon and Nikon each have precisely one truly extraordinary, fully usable statement lens at the outset, so good that either one could make the case for buying the camera itself. And I think that is fine, as it is folly, really, to expect any camera manufacturer to hatch a new system fully formed. The autofocusing, though non-image stabilized Canon RF 50mm f1.2, which at this point can be used only on the non-IBIS equipped R, and the autofocusing, yes, image stabilized Nikkor Z 35mm f1.8s, your mileage may vary. Yeah, run-on sentences are awful, but that one, the run-on sentences are awful one, doesn't count for the one of the 5. Nor the sentence about it not counting. Or that one, this one. 4. With this said, and while I acknowledge that there are more than just these few parameters on which to judge, for me the net of it is that the Nikon Zs are more thoroughly thought out, more complete, and more successful hybrid cameras than the R by virtue of their sensor-based in-body image stabilization, which the R lacks, their ergonomics, though reasonable people may disagree, and superior video, both in terms of image quality and freedom from the 1.8x crop present on the R in 4K, which affects image quality and workflow. And finally, 5. None of this should matter to any of you who have done your own analyses and concluded something different, because from what and how you shoot to the superior ability of each manufacturer to adapt its own legacy glass, how you happen to be built artistically, physically, emotionally, intellectually, or financially, each camera has enough strengths that a justifiable case can be made for any of them, or enough weaknesses to justify standing pat and waiting, or going somewhere else. But before we get into more detail, a moment or two about wow. The first time I ever laid hands on a Sony a6000 and peered through the EVF, coming as I did from a Canon 5D Mark II, it wowed me. It was very different, small. EVF, much better. Stunning autofocus, great focus assists, a mic jack. The first time I laid hands on a FujiFilm X-T3, it wowed me. It was different. Old school dials. Permanently marked controls for exposure triangle. Better. Film simulations like a Crux. That X-Trans sensor that yielded noiseless 27 by 40 inch prints. The petite extraordinary primes. The first time I ever laid hands on a Leica TL2 with Visoflex, it wowed me too. Different. Small, Bauhaus, and yet an outstanding industrial design homage to the original Leica. Better. The best user interface I'd seen this side of the Hasselblad H6D and X1D. A tilting EVF that changed the relationship between my hands and my eye to make it perfect. After a few days with a Panasonic GH5, it wowed me because it just worked. Especially how much better it worked, how many things it did that no other camera would at anywhere near the price. Any price, really, given what I do. You get the idea. There are different kinds of wow, and mine may not be yours, but the power of wow, that is a bit universal, I think. As in, wow is what turns you into a convert, motivates you to pull out your wallet and plunk down the plastic, or tap the smartphone. It's what leads you to expand your vistas, try new things. become a fan, a devotee, a brand ambassador, possibly incur the wrath of your significant other, who, as the less emotionally invested one, might have qualms about the lost opportunities your purchase has caused. If you've never shot with a mirrorless camera, the R or Zs may in fact wow you. After all, the EVF of a mirrorless camera alone is a big deal, perhaps the biggest. You see precisely what your image will be before it is captured. No need for old school Polaroids. No need for the modern day equivalent, chimping. In either case, you have the ability to see it in real time. Without the need for that mirror box, you may be wowed by the smaller size of the fact that you can shoot utterly silently. And yeah, wow. But if you have shot with mirrorless before, these cameras are much less likely to blow you away. They are much less likely to wow you. They are not revolutionary in that context. As I'm likely to say multiple times throughout this video, this is not a criticism, but it is an observation, which in this case tells you a great deal about where Canon and Nikon are and where they're headed, because they've certainly had enough time to think through what they want to accomplish and who they want to reach. So let's get into it. What do I mean when I say the Rs and the Zs are at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to lens selection? Don't Nikon and Canon have vastly more lenses at different capabilities and price points, plus an enormous third-party ecosystem? Well, yeah, they do. But this is relevant only if you're trying to protect or expand your existing financial and workflow investments in those legacy mount systems. I mean, all of the other systems I've mentioned have way more native mount primes and zooms of excellent quality than the 3 Z mount lenses Nikon has and the 4 RF mount lenses Canon has at launch. Though, give Nikon and Canon a break. I don't know of any first generation camera ever launched with a complete lens line, and if you do, let me know. And there's good reason for that. It makes no economic sense. Yes, this is an unequivocal statement. No, we don't have time to get into it here, so let's move on. With a 5-year head start, Sony's full-frame lens line is now very robust, boasting some of the sharpest, smoothest, fastest, and quietest autofocusing lenses I've ever seen, prime or zoom. Their top-of-the-line G Master series currently runs from a 24-1.4 all the way up to their 400 2.8. In addition to Holy Trinity zooms and more. And there are other non-G Master lenses which are superb as well, like the 35 1.4 or 92.8 macro, though last time I listened, you could hear the 90 focusing, so not great for video. Fujifilm released their first X-mount APS-C coverage lenses 6 years ago. Enough time since then to create everything from the brilliant 16mm 1.4 to 56mm f1.2 and 200mm f2 prime that has just come out, to their red badge zooms and XK Cine zooms. This is just a partial listing too. Though yes, they might look to a line refresh to make all of their best lenses absolutely silent and stepless. Panasonic and Olympus have had 10 years to develop micro four thirds coverage lenses like the Leica DG series of primes and zooms running from the DG Summilux 12mm 1.4 up to the DG Vario Elmer at 100 to 400 2.8 to 4, or the Olympus Pro series 17, 25, and 45 f1.2 lenses. Never mind their 75 1.8 so astoundingly crisp and contrasting on our GH5 in the real world that I've never bothered looking at the MTF charts, or the 50 to 200 2.84, which we just named Lens of the Year. Though, yes, I'd like to see even faster glass. Hold that thought for just a moment. All of these lenses are relatively recent, ground-up, short-flange distance, purpose-built mirrorless designs. Though, it must be said, none of them offer depth of field as shallow for a given field of view as, say, the Canon RF50 1.2 and Nikkor Z35 1.8s. This is an unequivocal benefit of full frame, as is the smaller perspective distortion for a given field of view. And none combines AF speed, IQ silence, and build quality in quite the same way as these two, in my book. But what these two do give up is any pretense to being petite. Next. What do I mean when I say the R and Z are at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to video capabilities? Well, I should say first, the R is at more of a disadvantage than the Zs, but hold that thought for a moment. What they have in common is a recording limit of 30 minutes, up to UHD 4K 8-bit 420 internal recording, up to 30 frames per second. These are limitations that Panasonic's Micro Four Thirds GH5 blows through entirely, recording DCI 4K internally up to 10-bit 422 up to 60 frames per second, while the X-T3 can record DCI 4K internally up to 10-bit 420, also up to 60 frames per second, though limited to 30 minutes. And these two crop sensor cameras do it cleanly. What they don't have in common is that the R is further hampered by the now infamous 1.8x crop in 4K and 120 frames per second in 720p only. These are such significant shortcomings that the appropriate Sony camera with which to compare the R, I think, is actually the 3-year-old APS-C censored non-IBIS $750 Sony a6300. In fact, I've come to think of the R as a second-generation APS-C interchangeable lens hybrid camera that offers fourth-generation full-frame image quality for stills with, call it second-generation, third-generation shooting speed, maybe third-generation AF. Hold that thought. I know this is an unusual angle to pursue, but maybe you don't need to hold that thought too strongly. Disagree. That's fine. But tell me, in the following test, which is the R, which is the Z7, which is the a6300, and which is the little GH5, which is using new mount glass, which isn't, how much better are or aren't they? Are you not surprised? I think I would be if I hadn't already seen this before, or if I hadn't fully thought through the implications of the various specifications. The a6300 and the GH5 give up just about nothing to my eyes in this test. By the way, that's a Sony FE24-105 f4 on the 6300, a Leica DG Vario 12-62.8 to 4 on the GH5. The Z7 is sporting the Z24-70 f4, and the R is shooting through the RF 24-105 f4. You could say that in the real world, Canon's 4K crop is no big deal. IQ is fine. Noise is not an issue. Maybe it doesn't matter because you're a real DP and all real DPs light so that they can film at base ISO. Maybe it doesn't matter because if what's happening in the frame is compelling enough, the narrative moment powerful enough, no one will be paying attention to the noise or the slightly muddied by comparison footage. I might agree with you. I absolutely would not agree with you that 120 frames per second at 720p is fine. Though, if you never shoot at that speed, and we do only very occasionally, I'd say, well, yeah, it doesn't matter either. I'd still be very annoyed at having to swap lenses when switching to stills. You could also say, though, that 4K is overkill, that the R is fine at 1080p, no crop with which to contend. I understand. You have to ask, what's the point of having what are supposed to be the greatest lenses ever made from these manufacturers if the sensor can't take advantage of them? And if you're only talking stills, is it worth that much money to buy the R just to have the EVF? Maybe. But this is why I keep saying that for the work we do, 4K is more important than bitrate, color depth, or even the best glass. And why we place such an emphasis on 4K video capabilities when we look at any camera in 2018, unless it truly is positioned for stills only. Not to beat a dead horse, but the R just isn't there. The Nikon Z, on the other hand, from sensor to IBIS is, more or less. but it does not blow away the crop sensor, guys. From all reports I've seen, the 40% less expensive Z6 offers better video performance than the 7. But the FujiFilm X-T3, which I did not have on hand at the time, is even better and $500 less than the 6. Which again, may or may not mean that much to you. Fine in either case. Yet you have to ask yourself, especially if you're a Canon shooter who wants to explore video, would you be better off learning about video, lighting, audio, dynamic movement, editing, and narrative development over the next year or two as Canon rounds out its RF roadmap and adds new bodies, maybe one with IBIS, maybe without the crop, by picking up, say, a used a6300 Metabones adapter, call it $600 for the body, $250 for the adapter, or pay 3 times that much, $2,400 for a first generation R with base adapter. If you pony up the R, are you paying that premium for superior image quality? Yes, the R is vastly better built, has a superior EVF, feels dramatically better in hand, has a flippy screen, and will give you better autofocus performance from your adapted EF glass. And you will get 10-bit video when you send it out through HDMI. It feels great in the hand, looks great through the EVF. But let's think about that. And we can think about this for the Zs as well, because if you want that 10-bit 422, hey, full frame, ultimate image quality, now you're also talking about another $700 for an Atomos Ninja 5 or more. Maybe less if you buy a used Inferno or Blackmagic 4K Video Assist. More storage, I'd start with something like the G-Speed Shuttle XL 4-bay RAID system, minimal, with say a minimum of 24 terabytes, call that about another $2,000. And then if you don't already have one, something like a maxed out 2018 iMac, unlikely to spend less than about $3,700. These numbers have a way of sneaking up on you. I know about that. Or you could just buy a new GH5 with adapter. They're not selling for much less used these days on eBay, for less than $2,000, with great IBIS, great ergos, great EVF, great flippy screen, no need for external recording monitor, 60 frames per second in 4K, a much better stills camera than you might expect at normal viewing distances and size, with money left over for your editing hardware upgrades. If you're a Nikon shooter, the questions and options are the same and not, because as we keep coming back to it, the Z already has IBIS and doesn't suffer from the 1.8x 4K crop. Though, as I mentioned a moment ago, the Z6 is apparently a better hybrid value than the Z7, even if I personally haven't yet gone hands-on with it. I trust guys like Jordan. It offers the best video capability of the 3 new full-frame guys, costs $1,400 less than the 7 and $300 less than the R. It has solid ergonomics and build quality, an already solid 24-megapixel full-frame, and again, a no-crop sensor for 4K and IBIS 2. In either case, equally true for the R, if you don't need 10-bit 422 and don't need more than 30 minutes worth of recording at a clip, and I'll just say it, the vast majority of us don't, then you don't need the external monitor recorder and post-production upgrades. In essence, if you go with a Z6, you've got the full-frame equivalent of a Z-mount Micro Four Thirds $1,300 Panasonic G9, great camera. Or a full-frame $2,000 Sony a7 III, also a great camera and arguably the best all-arounder out there today, without the cost of switching, along with a manual of arms better than the Sonys, if not the Panasonics. The Z-series ergos are also close enough to the DSLR you already have, assuming you've got a Nikon, to make the transition pretty easy, which you can't quite say if you're a Canon shooter looking at the R. Next, burst rates. What do I mean when I say the Rs and Zs are at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to burst rates? I mean, The FujiFilm X-T3 can shoot at 11 frames per second mechanical shutter, up to 20 frames per second electronic, or 30 frames per second crop, with autofocus and auto exposure maintained. The Panasonics can do the same kind of thing, though the X-T3's AF is dramatically better. The Z's and the R especially don't come close when you look at real-world shooting and continuous AF and auto exposure. The R was slow enough when I shot it with the 51.2, though did I mention the lens is spectacular? That it actually surprised me, and actually got in the way of this bartender sequence. But the Z is no speed demon either. Let's shift to the broader question of being buttoned up. What do I mean by that? Well, literally on the R, it's things like the on-off switch or multifunction bar, for which so many folks, including myself, when I first got my hands on them at launch, just couldn't get to. Okay. Again, check out my earlier R video, the one entitled Paradox, for details. Or how you switch between video and stills mode on the R. I'm stunned, actually, that you have to simultaneously press the mode and info buttons to do this. I simply can't imagine, though I accept this may be my own limitation, that any hybrid shooter would actually ask for this workflow rather than the direct buttons on any other series hybrid, including the Z's. The remote app is laggy, feature poor, and in its initial connection between camera and smartphone, it candidly looks more like a proof of concept than finished app. It is functionally far behind those from Panasonic and Leica, visually behind Nikon's latest version of SnapBridge, though actually slightly ahead of SnapBridge for functionality in video mode. Very slightly. The Z's literally don't have the illuminated buttons of the D850. They don't offer dirty HDMI out so gear reviewers and educators can show you what's happening. The tethering software, Camera Control Pro 2, is dramatically less complete and finished product than Panasonic's Lumix Tether, for example, which is a critical part of our YouTube production workflow. Ditto SnapBridge when asked to double as a remote control tool on your smartphone for video, even less featured than Canon's Camera Connect. The high megapixel count Z7, for all its megapixels, doesn't offer the pixel shifting that the A7R3 and Panasonic G9 do, a feature I've found incredibly useful for product shots. Neither Z can do focus peaking and zebras simultaneously. Banding has been reported on both, though only under extreme conditions. And this, I think, is especially critical because assumptions are the mothers of all cock-ups. Neither of the Z's nor the R focus as well as their DSLR siblings. Some of these things are firmware fixes, but some are not. What are buttoned up on both companies' cameras and lenses are the build quality, the feel, the tolerances. They are outstanding, as well they should be. Next, what do I mean when I assert each brand has only one statement lens? I mean, the whole rationale for the new mounts is to do things with lens design that they haven't been able to do before. But roadmap or not, it is unclear at this point what that actually means. On the one hand, while there are other as fast or faster 35mm and 50mm primes out there, I've never seen ones, as I think I may have said multiple times by now, that are this well corrected, this sharp, this silent, this smooth, and this fast to autofocus. On the other hand, while you can certainly argue that Canon's 28 to 70mm f2 offers a combination of focal range and speed never before seen, at least not of which I'm aware, the size, weight, and absence of image stabilization in lens or body makes it less obvious to me that it will, say for a wedding photographer, result in significantly better images than their 24 to 72.8L. The paradox is clear. If you want to shoot in low light, Canon is giving with one hand, that one stop of additional light gathering, and taking away with the other, the absence of any kind of image stabilization. Both companies image-stabilized new mount zooms. Canon's RF24-105 f4 and Nikon's Z24-70 f4S are both very tasty. But in my limited experience, they weren't dramatically better than our own copy of Sony's excellent and very similar 24-105mm f4.2. Which raises the question, how much better will these new lenses be than the legacy glass they supplant, especially in terms of correction and sharpness, without software intervention? This is an important question for two reasons. First, if they aren't significantly better or cheaper, who cares what latitude the new lens mounts give to optical designers? Second, until onboard processors and algorithms are powerful enough, all software correction does not work in video, meaning for half of what we do, the new lenses and cameras wouldn't help. And finally, will the other lenses on the roadmap be released on schedule? That is to say, the manufacturers and yours, at prices that make sense to you. So let's talk about price and size and weight. This is huge for me, pun intended. Even when crop sensor bodies like the $1,700 GH5 or $1,650 Fuji X-H1 approach the size of the best full-frame cameras, or full-frame cameras approach the size of crop sensor mirrorless, total system size and weight are always significantly less than full-frame because of the glass. Price often, if not always, less. If you haven't already seen it, I encourage you to take a look at the review we did last week of this Sigma 60-600 EF mount adapted to the R. But this doesn't mean there aren't compelling reasons to opt for full-frame glass over crop sensor glass. You can sometimes get more for your money with full-frame lenses. Think the up until recently priced $1,600, now $1,200, image-stabilized Leica Nocticron 42.5mm f1.2, which is in essence from a full-frame field of view and depth of field equivalent of 85 to 2.4, compared to my 2016 lens of the year, Sony's still $1,800 non-image stabilized 85-1.4 G Master, the outstanding and bargain price by comparison image stabilized $1,050 Zeiss Batis 85-1.8, or the modestly priced but still optically outstanding $600 Sony FE 85-1.8. There's the rub of crop sensor lenses. You'd need a 1.0 autofocusing micro four thirds lens to get the depth of field of a full frame 2.0, never mind 1.8, 1.4, or 1.2. And there's no such animal yet. Still, it's a little bit easier with the APS-C, as a 1.2 will give you the depth of field full frame equivalent of 1.8. Though in either case, now you're also getting into slightly greater perspective distortion born of the shorter focal lengths of the crop sensor lenses for a given field of view, and Fuji promises a 33 1.0. On the other hand, crop sensor lenses have clear advantages when going long. All of which, taken together and more fully articulated, now allow me to reduce my thoughts on the Z's and the R to a single run-on sentence. Unless you are wholly committed to Canon and Nikon, have allocated budget to acquire the hardware necessary to handle their signature video capabilities during production and in post, don't mind their recording limitations compared to the best crop sensor cameras now out there if you're not. Don't mind that in reality the Z and R are not dramatically better in video and sometimes not as good as APS-C or even micro four thirds alternatives. Don't mind that they are not as accomplished stills cameras as their DSLR forebears. And you definitely do not want to learn another manual of arms. There is a strong case to be made to wait a year or two or add a second brand to your stable. Let's return to the beginning and the question of what is important. If you like what you've seen here today, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, join the conversation in the comments section below. You guys are just so sharp and so generous. Just wow. Share, create a playlist, consider supporting our work by using our no-cost to you affiliate links down below, or making a contribution directly via the PayPal link down below. As always, we thank you for it. For Three Blind Men and an Elephant, I'm Brownstein. See you next time.